What's up, dudes? In this episode, we sit down with an international best-selling thriller and horror author J.D. Barker. From The Fourth Monkey to Dracul, Barker has mastered the art of suspense, blending classic gothic terror with modern chills, with some chaos in it. We love chaos on this show, you guys know that. We talk haunted inspirations, collaborations with legends, and the dark corners where his stories come to life. Let's get into it. What is up, dudes? Welcome back to the Paranormal Dudes podcast, episode 61. I'm here joined with J.D. Barker, who's an illustrious author within, I would say, thriller, horror, and kind of leak into a bunch of other genres. Am I right, JD, on that?
Yeah, I piss off my agents and my editors because I can't seem to stick in one particular lane. But when I first started writing, I was scared to death of writing that one book and like having to write that same book but different for the rest of my life. So
Nice,
I
nice.
purposely bounced back and forth between horror and thriller, horror, thriller. I'm all over the place. But what I'm finding is over time the audience comes with you, which is fantastic.
That's awesome. And you know what? The chaos is what our show is a little chaotic, so it only makes sense that we wanted to have you on the show. We love the chaos of your genres for sure. And you're in the middle of writing right now, from what we know. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm always working on something. I'm wrapping up. I read a lot of books with James Patterson, and we're writing the tail end of a new book right now.
Nice. So awesome. Definitely. Well, I actually have some questions for you that will tie into a lot of our audience, because they're baked into horror and true crime, as well as thrillers. So, and obviously, as I mentioned, a lot of our aesthetic is very much baked into the 80s themes. And I think it's perfect because, I don't know, it definitely, from a lot of your novels, it feels like it has some ties to the 80s in many ways when it comes to horror. You said in the past that your first stories were about ghosts and gremlins. Is that correct?
Yeah, just basically scary stuff.
Yeah.
I grew up without a TV in the house, so I was reading at a really early age. Started reading around 3, and by the time I got into kindergarten, I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews, and moved on to Charles
Nice.
Dickens and stuff like that. But the
Nice.
very first book that I ever picked up that I considered to be an adult book was Dracula. I picked up a copy of it at a garage sale with my mom for 25 cents, and I didn't think she'd let me buy it because the cover looked really scary. I was 8 years old, and she said yes. I took it home and I read it, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I slept with the lights on for like 3 weeks after that, and it's the first time a book had ever brought that kind of feeling out in me. Like that kind of an emotional reaction. And honestly, like I've been chasing that feeling ever since, both as a reader and a writer.
That's awesome. I love that. And honestly, because we explore a lot of the paranormal side on our show. So, did anything specific happen to you as a child that could have, outside of everything you just mentioned, did anything happen to you in real life that could have propelled you into this genre and kind of solidified um, you wanting to write books in this specific genre, or this lane, I should say? We're going to say the JD Barker lane, because your lane is chaotic and there's a lot of things coupled together.
Yeah, I don't know if there was anything like any one particular event. I'm 54 now. I'm smart enough to know there's a lot I don't know. So I try to keep an open mind when it comes to the paranormal. I recently wrote a book called Something I Keep Upstairs. and it's a haunted house story, but it's based on a real house. It's a tiny little house on an island right off the coast of the island where I live. And the first time that I went out there, I went out there by boat with a guy who was working on renovating it, trying to bring it back to life and ultimately turn it into a museum. But he let me inside, and I was standing in there, and like literally every bone in my body just wanted to get out. I don't know if you've ever been in some place where you've had that kind of feeling, but like, the hair on the back of my neck is standing up, like I'm looking around all over the place. And like there's nothing going on to explain that. There was nothing really happening. I'm in this house basically by myself. But I wanted to get out of there as fast as I possibly could. And I started to research the place after I got back home and realized that a lot of bad things had happened on this particular island where this house is now standing over centuries. At one point, there was a yellow fever quarantine zone. If somebody got sick, they
Oh,
literally
wow.
put them out there to die. During the Spanish-American War, they used to dock the ships out there, and they would basically force everybody to stay on the ship until everybody either died of starvation or disease, and then they would take the boat because that's what they ultimately wanted. But over hundreds of years, a lot of people lost their lives out in these waters on this island. And in talking to a lot of people that handle like paranormal investigations, a lot of them tend to believe that all life is energy. When something dies, that energy doesn't disappear; it just moves on to someplace else. So if a lot of things happen in one particular spot, particularly bad things, it's almost like a battery that gets charged, and like all of that, it just gets captured in that one spot. And I think that's what we feel. And it's funny because we like to think that we've evolved. Like if we don't experience these instinctual things anymore. But like if you're standing in a room and something makes a noise and there's a cat next to you, that cat is going to bolt. It doesn't care what made the noise. It's gone. People are stupid. Like we will walk over to the corner of the room where the noise came from. We will try to figure out
It's,
what it was,
it's so
and like
true.
that's the kind of thing that would get you eaten. A couple
Yeah,
thousand years
exactly.
ago. I
Exactly.
think we need to listen to those instincts a little bit more than we do today.
No, you're 100% correct. And I'm a testament to that as well. And Jesse can agree with me on this because she was actually there for this specific uh, time in our lives where there was a knock at our front door. And I'm young. I think we're 19. This was like 20 some odd years ago, and I didn't know you're not supposed to open the door to nothing. If nothing's there, there's something that's trying to come in. And me and my friends, we opened the door, uh, not knowing that we invited something in. And eventually it led to, I mean, whether you want to believe it or not, it happened. One of our friends ended up getting possessed by something that we opened. Uh, and so I totally get it. And I kind of applied that to my life moving forward. I'm a little more reserved when it comes to people. So it kind of tied into my life in general. But I totally get what you're saying. It does totally make sense. So I have another question to go based off of what you said. Um, when it comes to life experiences, I want to tie this into when you're writing, because it's all. I've always been fascinated by writers and how they come to places or what inspires them to write certain novels or stories, even poems. When you're writing horror or suspense, do you ever feel like there's stories that come through you spiritually, like almost like a ghost is whispering, and you're listening? And how do you channel that otherworldly energy if that ever does happen to you? Not necessarily has to be a ghost, but maybe it's a supernatural energy in general that you feel like is happening.
Yeah, there's something there, and I get what you're saying. Like when I'm writing, when it's working and everything's firing on all cylinders, it's almost like I'm watching a movie play out in my head, and I'm just writing it down as fast as I can. Like I'm writing down what I'm seeing. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know where that story is coming from. I don't know where the characters are coming from. But it feels extremely real to me, and
Yeah,
I want to document it. I wrote a prequel to Dracula. Dracula has always been a big part of my life. I wrote a prequel
that's
to
awesome.
Dracula for Bram Stoker's family a few years back, and I had access to all of Bram Stoker's notes and his journals, and everything that he basically used when he wrote the original Dracula. And through that whole process, it honestly felt like Bram was standing there in the room. Like I would write a sentence, and he'd tell me, "No, that's not right. It happened this way." And then I would change it. Like it felt like he was part of that process. And again, like there's a lot out there that we don't understand. I think you just have to keep an open mind to it.
Oh yeah, you're 100% correct on that. And I don't know, it's like I said, it's always a thing of mine when it comes to authors where it's really more interesting to me. Yes, of course, the stories are very interesting within themselves, but at the same time, what drives me is the author themselves and how they come to a place of writing these specific stories, and the backstory is sometimes it's something that gets brings me closer to the author, and that's why I wanted to ask, because I feel like honestly you're gonna, within our community as well as us here on the show, uh, you have new readers. Like, we're gonna start buying a lot of your books because it's a lot of the things that you're outlining and your outlook on everything really is inspiring, and we want to dive in that a little further, especially like because I love to read. And you've mentioned in some of your that you cite Poe, Shelley, Stoker, and even Stephen King. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if I saw this incorrectly, but Stephen King granted you access to Leland Gaunt from Needful Things, correct? Is
Yeah,
that
so
right?
when I wrote my first book, it's called Forsaken. It came out about 11 years ago. Just to get the book finished, I wrote that the wife had to buy a journal, and I wrote that she
Mhm.
walked into Needful Things, Stephen King store, and bought it there. Fully expected to have to change that. It was just me trying to get that first draft done. But my wife read it, and she's way smarter than me when it comes to a lot of these decisions. She said, before you change that, let's see if we can get King's permission to use it. And long story short, I was able to do that. King read an
That's so
early copy
awesome.
of the manuscript, gave me his blessing to use that particular character, and he's been kind of a sounding board for me for the last 10 or 11 years. When I have questions, not only on the writing side but also the business side, and just trying to navigate this kind of stuff. He's a really great guy.
Definitely. And I'm assuming at some point you were a Stephen King fan. So were you fanboying just a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're all Stephen King fans
Yeah,
on some level. Because
definitely.
I mentioned that I started reading really early. When I read Dracula, and I kind of got that particular feeling, then I just jumped into horror, like with both feet. And this is about the time that King was really starting to gain traction. This was in my world late 70s, early 80s. So that's when Carrie came out and some of these other ones. I think he was about 2 or 3 books in. I think maybe. I forget which one it was. It might have been. It wasn't The Stand, but the one right before that. But like that had just come out. I went back and I started from the beginning and read Carrie, and then I read Salem's Lot and The Shining, and I was completely hooked. From the get go. So yeah, so I was definitely a fan. I mean, that's probably why I threw the Needful Things reference in there. It was just in my head.
Nice.
Never expected to
Nice.
actually connect with the guy. But it's funny in this world. Like the writer community is fairly small. And pretty much every writer that I've ever talked to, they all remember exactly what it was like to write that first novel and wonder if it was going to sell. And for them, it wasn't that long ago. And they're always willing to help, help out a fellow author or somebody trying to navigate those waters.
For sure. For sure. And honestly, that's got to be a big feat. Well, at least in my eyes, because also in the paranormal community, Stephen King is a big fixture as well. Even though he's not an investigator, he's not anything has anything to do with the spiritual side, but it's still a prominent name within the community as far as storytelling goes. Because I feel like it's an extension of our community, and I feel like you're a big part of it as well, and you're an extension of our community too. I don't know if you know that, but you are,
Oh, I appreciate it.
and yeah, for sure. And honestly, a lot of things that we were diving deep on as far as your honestly your rap sheet is awesome, and I say rap sheet because it's like you said, chaotic, and there's a lot of different genres that play into a lot of your books. One thing I did see is that you've collaborated with James Patterson on multiple horror leaning thrillers. What kind of create and just so that you're aware, I don't like voodoo. Voodoo scares the shit out of me. And voodoo, uh, I, Jessie, she's a practicing. Well, she doesn't practice anymore. She's a witch, but she's a dormant one, I should say. And I'm kind of scared of that stuff too, and I'm scared of anything that has to do with Native Americans as well. It just scares the crap out of me. What kind of creative voodoo happens when two big brains plot scares together? You and James Patterson.
Well, it's funny you mentioned earlier on about opening a door and letting something in. Every one of the things that you just described does that exact same thing. Whether it's voodoo, whether it's witchcraft, whether it's hanging out with a Ouija board on the couch by yourself, all of those things are possibly opening that door. Working with somebody like Patterson, it's been huge. The way this works in my world, like you write a book. I wrote a book called The Fourth Monkey. When that was finished up, my editor sent out copies to all the big name authors, hoping to get that blurb for the back of the cover. Greatest book ever. By so and so. One of those copies ended up on James Patterson's desk, and he read it and he liked it enough to give me a call and talk about it. And ultimately, that turned into us working together. And we wrote a book called The Coast to Coast Murders. And it was funny because I'm actually the only guy who's ever gotten James Patterson to write a book without an outline. We actually pants that one. But when we finished that up, he said, okay, we tried it your way. I'd like you to try it mine. So he sent me an outline for a book called The Noise, which was his take on horror. And pretty much the first time I think he's ever actually stepped into that world. And it was a very original take. And, if you're a fan of horror, pretty much everything's been done to death. So to be able to come up with something that hasn't been done is a tricky thing, but he did it. And we had a lot of fun writing that book. And I guess for the next couple, I kind of became his go-to guy. When he came up with a scary idea, I was the first person on his call sheet. So we ended up doing a number of scary titles. And the last few, we just kind of jumped back into straight up thrillers. Working with him, it's very much, he's got a masterclass you can take. So if you want to write a book, go to masterclass.com, take the James Patterson masterclass. Working with him is exactly like that, except he calls you and tells you everything you're doing wrong. And he knows exactly what he's talking about. He'll call me out on something and I'll get a little mad at him at first. And then I sit back and think about it and realize, the guy is actually right. There's a reason he sold as many books as he had. And, he's been fantastic as far as teaching me, not only about craft, but, business, same as like Stephen King and some of these other guys.
That's awesome. It has to be surreal to work with these people, and especially people that you look up to. Do you feel like you're fortunate when it comes to that?
Oh, absolutely. It's a weird dynamic because my best friend is actually a truck driver for a grocery store chain. So I can't, I can relate to him on a lot of different levels, but the things that happen in, with books and film and TV and those kind of things, that's just not something that's in his wheelhouse. So having other authors that I can pick up the phone and talk to about that kind of thing, it's very helpful.
Definitely.
So are you the guy that everybody comes to at the parties and they want to talk about scary stories or want to talk about, experiences to see if they can get into one of your books?
Oh, I don't know how many times somebody's come up to me and said, "Oh, I've got a great idea for a book," and then they want me to write it. And I've got files full of ideas for books. I don't really need them from other people. But I think if people do have a good enough idea, they should sit down and try to write it on their own. I think everybody, every person probably has at least one good book in them.
And when it comes to your preparation, like with when you're going to start writing a book, do you actually go, like, do you look at, I don't know, what prepares you? Do you look at scary things? Do you sit down and imagine like weird things happening, or do you go off of personal experiences? I'm pretty sure you guys touched some base on this, but
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of all of that stuff. I had mentioned my latest book, something I keep upstairs. There's a copy of it behind me there. So for that one, I had a tagline for a book. I knew I wanted to write a haunted house story, and I for years, and I had a tagline: for a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die. So that tagline was in my notes for just years, just sitting there, mixed in with a million other different ideas. And in 2019, my family and we moved to this little island called Newcastle, right off the coast of Portsmouth in New England. It's pretty small. I go for a run every day and I do a lap around the island. It's about 4 miles. And at one point I cross the beach. And when I'm standing out on the beach, if I look out over the water about a quarter mile out, there's another island. It's very small. It's only about an acre and there's one house sitting on it. And it's just far enough away where, you can see activity out there. You might see somebody walking on the beach. You might see a light come on, light turn off, that kind of thing. But you can't really tell what's happening out there. It's far enough away. So that kind of triggers what I call the what if gene in me. It makes me start wondering, what if this is happening? What if that's happening? And at one point, I made that connection. If I'm going to write the haunted house story, that's the house that I want to base it on. So in my novel, that house is privately owned. A woman owns it. Her family has had it for a very long time, and she passes away, and she leaves it to her 17-year-old grandson. He doesn't know a whole lot about her other than her name, but all of a sudden he's 17 years old and he inherits a house on a private island. He does exactly what you would expect a 17-year-old kid to do. He turns it into a party house for him and his friends. It's someplace where they can go by boat, where the parents can't bug them, the police can't bug them, and they can just have some fun. But partying at a house gets old after a while. So at some point, somebody raises their hand and says, "Hey, what would it take to turn this house into a haunted house?" And they start exactly where you would expect. They break out a Ouija board. There's a couple of scary stories.
Oh, no.
But the tagline for the book is always right there: for a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die. So you know where they're going. But a book like this is all about the journey. All those pieces just kind of came together over time. And with this being a real location, a real house that I could actually visit, that actually added a lot to it. Normally I can write a book in like 3 or 4 months. I'm pretty fast.
Oh,
This
wow.
one took me about four years from start to finish, because I would learn something new and then I would incorporate that into the book. To give you an example, back in 1973, somebody found 2 bodies buried in the beach out at that house. They were out there picnicking. They went out there by boat,
Wow.
just found these 2 bodies. And I found a newspaper article about it, and there's photographs. There's, local police officers, the local DA, and they're all standing over these bodies in the picture. And they were fighting over jurisdiction, because the island is actually right on the border between Maine and New Hampshire. And it used to be federal property. So everybody, in real life, like if somebody dies, if there's a murder, the law enforcement agencies play hot potato. Nobody actually wants it. It's not like on TV, on CSI, everybody, it's my case, it's my case.
Yeah.
They don't want it unless they can solve it, because they want the win in their column. So this didn't seem like a solvable case. So none of the local police departments wanted it. They ultimately decided, well, this was federal land. The FBI needs to take it. So the FBI took over the investigation. And again, this is all 1973, one newspaper article. There was absolutely nothing after that. I couldn't find a single shred of information about these 2 bodies. I contacted the local police departments. They had no record of it at all, as if almost like it never happened. But again, there's pictures, so we know that it did. I contacted the local FBI. They couldn't find a case file on it. They had no idea who the bodies were. They had no idea where the bodies went. But I incorporated all of that into the story. Now, if you flash forward into today, the book came out in May. When the story hit, the FBI actually reopened the investigation. They're trying to figure out what actually happened to those 2 people, from a case standpoint. So we may actually learn, so they could actually track down those bodies, and they may be, on a shelf somewhere for all we know. But with today's, abilities with DNA and things like that, they might be able to piece together what actually happened. But like all these things, it's just a mix of fact and fiction. It just kind of all jumbles together like chocolate and peanut butter, and all of a sudden you end up with something special.
Yeah. And since because I know us with our podcast, like I always do some type of prayer ritual, have my certain crystals here, because we tap into different types of things in the paranormal world. Do you ever is there anything that a ritual that you do, or anything or do you feel you need to do some type of protection of yourself because you're kind of always dabbling into these paranormal ideas or stories?
I don't, and maybe I should.
Yeah, maybe you should.
It seems like a really good idea. I needed to talk to you about 2 years ago before all this started.
Trust me, I'm right there with you, JD. He's whenever I'm doing something that's questionable, Jesse's quick to stop me, or I always consult her whether I should do said thing or not. A good example is here, because I'm located in Vegas. Here in Vegas, there's the I'm not sure if you're familiar with Zach Bagans from Ghost Adventures, but he has a haunted museum, and there's a lot of relics and different items he has in the museum that are haunted or possessed. And I always talk to Jesse whether I should go or not. I think that's like a perfect tie-in. I've never even looked at the lens that way, whether certain authors within the paranormal or horror or true crime ever really give themselves a cleanse or or anything like that right before they engage in all of that.
We probably need to. I don't know if you're familiar with a comedian named Matt Rife, but he just bought the Warren House.
Yes, yeah, he did.
Yes.
It's
We
got the
have an
actual
episode on that. Yeah,
yeah. So the
yes,
actual Annabelle doll and all these things, like he
yes,
actually
yes,
owns all this, and he bought it because he's a fan.
yeah.
But he's walking through this house. What kind of juju is
Oh, yeah,
Right.
floating around in
yeah,
there. I don't
yeah.
know. I don't know that I would do it. I mean, even the house that my story is based on, when I started talking to like the guys that restored it, the
Mhm.
contractors had stories about hearing voices upstairs in this one particular hallway while they were working, and there was nobody upstairs. And in this hallway, like there used to be a Coast Guard life saving station there. That was the last time the house was actually used. In this hallway, there's lockers along the one wall, and there's a room, like a bunk room, right next to that. So
Right.
back in the day, this is one of those places where there would have been a lot of people. But meanwhile, these guys are downstairs putting drywall up, and they're hearing voices up there when there shouldn't be voices up there. A lot of weird stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I believe everything you just said. I believe it 100% because I'm the paranormal dude. Hence our name. But it's
Yeah.
growing up. That's how it was for me as well. Is I was around 19 is when it kind of solidified that this was going to be a big part of my life. And things still happen to me now. Just so you kind of understand where we're coming from and why talking to you is so important. Yes, obviously I read a lot of books, and I wish you could get with George R. Martin and have him hurry up with his book. It's taking way too long for his new book. And especially the way you operate, I think it's amazing the way you operate. I would love to write my short stories in books. That's a dream of mine. Just an example, just the other day I was walking down the hallway, and through the crease of the doorway of my daughter's room, the light was on. So I'm thinking, okay, my daughter's in there. I open the door. As soon as I open the door, the light turns off. There's no one in there. Spookiest thing one of the spookiest things I've experienced as of my current age, I should say. I would love to chronicle that in a book. And that's why this just makes sense. If you could offer any advice as far as that goes, I would accept it and love
Well,
it.
I mean,
Actually,
the truth is, you just got to start writing it down, and it could be as simple as just a journal or a diary or just some app on your phone. Just write these things down and capture them. You again, you mentioned at the beginning of this interview that you opened a door and bad things happen.
Yep.
I think on the flip side of that, the spirits, ghosts, whatever those things are, word spreads. This guy opened a door, and then they
Yeah.
kind of hone in on you. I think
Yep.
the instinctual level thing that I was talking about earlier. I think the fact that you acknowledged it, you're one step closer to actually understanding it or being open to it. And I think that also kind of not necessarily invites it in, but it makes it more accessible, I think, to somebody like you versus somebody who completely denies it and is unwilling to accept it.
Sure.
It's almost like you're a wood door versus a steel door. There's a
I
difference
like
there.
that. I like that.
But yeah, I mean, I think you just need to write it down. Like I used to spend a lot of time visiting people at old folks' homes. I would just love to talk to older people because they're 70, 80, 90 years old. They're sitting in a corner in a chair. Sometimes they could go days at a time without talking to anybody. And if you speak to them, they've got some of the craziest stories, and they've lived through some amazing stuff, but they've never written it down.
Yeah.
They've never really told anybody, and one day they're gone, and all those stories vanished with them. And what you're talking about is no different. If you don't document it in one way or another, it's going to fade and vanish.
You're inspiring me to write this book.
All
That's
right.
for
Well,
sure.
when we hang up, that's your homework.
Totally fair. Totally fair. So one of the things that we love to talk about on the show is the entanglement with the paranormal and the quote unquote Illuminati and the demonic presence behind Hollywood. In the past, you've talked about Hollywood hell, vanished stars, stall scripts. What scares you more, true horror or the movie development purgatory?
Oh, geez, the movie development thing for sure. Um, I just always assumed, you write a good book, the folks in Hollywood come knocking, they make a movie, and a year later you're sitting in the theater watching it, and it's not like that at all. I've had 8 different
Yeah.
projects so far that have been optioned, and they're in various stages of what I call Hollywood hell. It's this one's got a director, this one's got a writer, this one's got a star, this one just lost its director, this one's got a script, this one's got a script that nobody likes. It's all over the place. Every time my film and TV agent calls me, it's either really good news or really bad news. There's no in between with those people. But I think it's a numbers game from my standpoint. I've had enough stuff optioned. I think sooner or later something is going to get made, and I'm constantly putting out new stuff, and that's getting optioned
Mhm.
too. So it's going to happen sooner or later.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's always fascinating. It's fascinated too. It fascinated me as well as far as Hollywood goes, because you basically have the source material for them, and they make it so erroneous and difficult when it comes to developing movies. And honestly, from what I've gathered on a lot of your work, I'm surprised there's not like 40 million movies about your stuff. It's amazing to me. Um, about how many times has Hollywood come knocking and just at the top of your head, and something actually works out and they actually, distribute a movie out there?
Well, somebody once told me if you watch the credits at the end of a movie, 5 or 6 minutes of just names going by, that movie wouldn't have happened if one of those names wasn't there.
True.
And that's literally what it is. It's a perfect storm of all these people that have to come together at the exact right moment with the right financing and the right filming location and the right schedule and the right script and the right this, the right that. It all has to come together, or it doesn't happen. I don't know anybody off the top of my head where it's just happened. Where they've written a book and it just became the movie. I've got a podcast called Writers Inc. where we've interviewed just about everybody. We talked to Gillian Flynn about 2 years ago about Gone Girl. She's still at home today trying to write the follow up to Gone Girl.
Right.
But like
Wow.
that book was actually her third book. Her first 2 did
Mm.
okay. They didn't really hit it out of the park or anything, but all of a sudden Gone Girl comes out and it just becomes this phenomenal thing that everybody's talking about. That movie happened fairly quickly, but still it wasn't just a straight up thing. Like she was brought in to write the screenplay by David Fincher, who they got lucky by getting him as a director, and him
Right.
asking her to write the screenplay as an author. She'd never written a screenplay before, and he kind of held her hand through that process. But like all these things had to happen in that particular order. If she would have written a screenplay first before they got a director, um, you know, David Fincher may have passed. You never
True.
know.
Yeah.
I've got a book called A Caller's Game that I wrote, and like at that point, everything that I've written had been optioned, with the exception of the very first one, the one with the Stephen King tie-in. That one's
Hmm.
never actually been optioned. It's the only one. But I was
Oh,
writing this book called A Caller's Game, and I got a little cocky. I wanted to see if I could write something that couldn't be filmed. So in this book, I blow up like half of New York. I'm like, there's no way they're gonna option
that's
this.
so awesome.
The book came out and it immediately got optioned by Ridley Scott's company. They're like, we're gonna make this. We're
Wow.
gonna get this done. They ended up sitting on it for a while, and it turns out, you can film pretty much everything. At the time, they told me it would cost about $200 million to blow up everything that I wanted to blow up. So they started working on it. At one point, I got a phone call from my agent. He said that Jennifer Garner loves it. She wants to be part of it. They
Wow.
immediately got a first look with Netflix that brought in a budget. We had all these things that happened. And then about a week later, I got another phone call. Jennifer Garner's got a scheduling conflict, so she has to pull out. So Netflix went
Mm,
away. The budget went away, which is that roller coaster ride that I was telling you about. So
yes,
you just you
definitely.
just you just never know. At one point they asked me to write the screenplay for that, and I tried to do that, and my movie ended up being 4.5 hours long, because I didn't know what to take out. So I left it all in. And this is probably about 6, 7 years ago. So obviously nobody's going to make a 4.5 hour movie. So we shelved that. We figured nothing would come of it. But about 2 months ago, that got rekindled, because in today's world, we've got streaming, and the streaming
Yep.
services have no problem putting out something that's 2 or 3 episodes, something shorter. So now all of a sudden, a 4.5 hour movie, you cut it in half and it becomes 2 streaming episodes, and it works. But it's all about timing. You never know what's going to hit and when.
So when you've been doing all your have you ever gone like on very large book tours like with crazy fans or anything? Or have you ever seen or just in the social media or in the paranormal world seen anybody kind of give a I guess review your books or reviews your work in somehow that was just
In
crazy
real
or
life,
bogus?
like just right
Yeah.
in front of them.
Or just in general, like if you're on your book tours, are there any crazy fans that are like, just trying to, I guess, like that read your stories and just first, I guess, do you have any crazy fans that are like very crazy paranormal people?
Yeah, yeah,
Like just
exactly.
come up with you with weird, scary questions. And then I guess the two-part question would be like, have you ever heard them interpret your books in any weird way that you're like, that's totally not what I was trying to convey with that?
That first of all, I won't call them crazy because sooner or later I'll be standing in front of these people again. Let's just call them
Smart.
dedicated,
That's smart. Yeah, dedicated.
dedicated
There you go.
fans.
Dedicated. There you go. I like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, everybody's got an opinion, right? Like I'll read a book, and I've got my own opinions of that particular book, and it's kind of cool to be able to sit down with the person who actually created that story. But I'll have fans tell me, well, I don't think that character would do that, and it's well, that's what they did, because there is no right or wrong to it. It's to me, it's fantastic just to see those reactions. I was recently in Budapest for the first time, and I've had I think 6 or 7 books come out in that part of the world, but I had never been there before. And I did a book talk, and there were about 1,000 people that showed up for a signing in Budapest. And like that is just
Oh,
such an incredible, rewarding experience. To go someplace
sure.
that I consider to be like foreign like that, and have that many people come by. And be familiar with the books. Like it's a priceless experience.
That's
So
so
for
awesome.
let's say our fans, right? So like our people are gonna watch this podcast, maybe they have heard of you or they haven't. What is one of your books that you would recommend that they should start with?
It depends where they lean. If they like scary stuff, I wrote a prequel to Dracula, which I love. My latest one, something I keep upstairs, is another one of the scary books. My very first one, Forsaken, is another scary one. If they lean more towards thriller, I tell people to start with The Fourth Monkey. That's probably my
Mhm.
most popular one.
Okay, perfect. If you guys are watching or listening, check out those books from J.D. Barker. Hopefully, it's a good segue into a lot of his work. So, this next question I have for you is near and dear to my heart. And I say this because my daughter is on the spectrum. And in the past, you've called your Asperger's diagnosis a superpower, which I say the same for my daughter. Um, and you've credited it as it's enhanced a lot of your writing. Does it help you sense and manifest the uncanny in ways other authors might miss in certain terms?
I was diagnosed at 22, so I was living with this for a while before I realized exactly what it was. But
Right.
I used to work as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, and I would write a lot of memoirs for other people.
Wow. Okay.
And I could easily, sit down with a female politician, and then I could write a book in first person from her point of view. I
Hmm.
didn't realize that this was a thing. But what I learned later is, autistic people like me, when we're in social situations, we tend to mimic other people.
Right.
So if I'm at a party and somebody cracks a joke, I'm going to laugh because the other people around me are laughing, not necessarily because I found the joke to be funny, but I mimic their actions. One of the things I've been able to do my whole life is mimic people on paper. So if you put something in front of me that's written by somebody else, I can read that and I can pick up on their vocabulary, their writing style, their voice, their cadence, and I can continue that story in their voice. I can keep that going. Like if you read the prequel to Dracula, there's very large sections of that were written by Bram Stoker. But even I can't tell what he wrote versus what I wrote because it's so similar. So that's
That's
definitely
awesome.
a big part of it. Very good with computer code. A lot of autistic people tend to we see the patterns in those types of things. So when you write the first line of code, you have to understand how it's going to impact the last line of code. And writing a book is no different. When I write that first sentence, I understand how it's going to impact the last sentence, and I can kind of see the structure and everything that falls in between.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And it is one of the questions I put down because, like I said, it is something that's very important to me. Uh, I love my daughter very much. She's number one in my life, and just these types of interactions and stories, they inspire. And hopefully, one of our audience, if you're on the spectrum and you're watching this, um, hopefully you get inspired by that. And that's amazing the way you described it, especially with your prequel to Dracula, that you can't really tell because you're so good at mimicking other people's styles, which is totally awesome, by the way. Yeah, that's amazing to me. Thank you for answering that. A lot of people are kind of shy when it comes to those kind of questions, and um, I just want to thank you because you answered it.
No, I try to talk about it as much as I can because, I've been on the flip side of that. Like I'm fairly successful at this point in my life. But, I've met with parents that have, an 18-month-old autistic child. And like that kid could be beating his head against the wall until it, it bleeds. It's screaming because somebody
Right.
touched him. And, if you're a parent and you're dealing with that, that's a very rough thing. And like you can't really necessarily see the light at the end of the tunnel. But, I think if you do take a step back, I have yet to meet an autistic kid that doesn't have some kind of special ability. And if you can hone in on that and you can find it and double down on it and encourage it, that can become something that they can not only pursue, but something they can probably pursue better than anybody else.
Yeah.
Great. I appreciate that. So pivoting just a little bit, two things I wanted to ask you. I know we're nearing the end of our time, and so a big portion of our YouTube channel, or I should say our show in general, is music. I'm a big, I wouldn't say producer. Yeah, I guess I'm a producer in many ways. I produce a lot of music, different types, especially in the 80s realm. I love synthwave, synth pop, all of that stuff, and I bake it into a lot of our videos. So something that's also very intriguing is with one of your writings, which is with something I keep upstairs and a caller's game. Your fiction touches on haunted spaces, kind of, and psychological dread. Do you ever create playlists or soundscapes to get into the mood whenever you're writing or thinking of ideas?
I don't. I know many authors that do. I actually, I'm very boring. I listen to a thunderstorm soundtrack, basically
Oh,
white noise,
That's
whenever
awesome.
that's
I'm writing.
interesting.
Back when I worked in the corporate world, my last real job, I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm, which is as horrible as it sounds. But I worked about 80 hours a week. I worked a lot. So like when I wanted to write, I had to squeeze that time in anywhere that I could. And I found that if I listened to that particular sound, it's almost like a Pavlov's dog kind of thing. The second I hear that thunderstorm, my brain knows, oh, we're writing now, and I can jump right into it. If I listen to music on any level while I'm writing, the cadence of that music finds its way to the page. So if the music starts to pick up pace, the pace of the story starts to pick up. If it slows down, the story starts to slow down. There's no way I could listen to anything that's got lyrics, because like that would work its way into it too. But I know
Okay.
plenty of authors that do. They'll come up with a particular playlist and listen to it over and over again while they're writing that book. In today's world, a lot of them put that playlist out on social media so that other people can listen to it while they're reading the book. Very cool thing, but I've never been that guy.
Oh, I see. And I never thought of it that way. I mean, the lyrics kind of influence what's on the what they write down. I've never caught
Yeah.
that. That's
Well, it's like
awesome.
if you're watching a movie, listen to the music. Try to tune out what's actually
True.
happening, and it's following the
True.
action on the screen. I just watched Speed the other night. Again, I love that movie, but it's got
Awesome
one
movie.
of the best soundtracks. It's like a very simple soundtrack, but like that music, like it keys up the anxiety in you the
Oh,
second you
yeah.
hear those first opening notes, and that's no accident. So if I were to listen to that while I was writing, the same thing would come out on the page.
Oh, definitely. And we're almost at time, and I have one last question, and this one's a fun one. Okay, I promise. If a real and paranormal investigator, I don't know if you're familiar with any of them, did come calling, which of your characters or monsters might friend or haunt those investigators, if that were the case?
Well, we've actually had real paranormal investigators come out to the house on Wood
Mm,
Island, the basis for something I
Oh,
keep upstairs. And there's a lot of that starting to show up on social media now because the house itself, they finished it. It's a museum. You can actually get out there by boat So they have people that go out there to investigate the house, and they're starting to find some really cool things. So yeah, I mean, if there's anything, it's probably that. I think some of the characters from that particular book are going to start, working their way out.
Awesome. Jesse, do you have another question for
Yeah, I have one.
JD?
I have a question. So just because of like the genre that you're writing, do you ever see yourself writing any other type of genres or something that you kind of explored from the
Jesse,
ones that
he's not going to write Eat, Pray, Love number 3, okay?
maybe
No,
they're the
that's
genres
a
you would
good point.
explore.
So, if you go to my Wikipedia page, I think it says that I'm a suspense author who may include elements of horror, sci-fi, this or
Right.
that. That's kind of how I look at it. Suspense is my common thread, so the story itself has to be a suspense story. But I can include other things in that. I read a ton of stuff. I mean, I even read romance quite a bit because, to me, like that, like that will fit into any genre. You can write a sci-fi novel, and if you throw a romance, semi-plot in there, makes it that much better. So I read across the board. But for the most part, I think, that common thread of suspense is always going to be there.
Have you ever read Splendor in the Grass?
I have not.
You should. It's a great one. That's a great novel, to be honest.
I'll add it to the list.
Yeah, there
Right,
you go.
yeah.
Well, we're nearing at the end of our time. I want to save these last few minutes if you want to plug anything, JD, to our audience. And I know you're writing right now, and you have a book out. Is there anything you want to let our audience know before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest place to find me is jdbarker.com. I'm on all the social media sites at jdbarker is my typical username. Latest book to come out is the one we've been talking about, something I keep upstairs. If you lean more towards thriller, my last book with James Patterson was called The Writer. That one came out a couple of months ago.
Perfect. Well, we do want to thank you so much for joining the show, JD. It was an amazing time.
Very cool.
Hopefully we can have another discussion with you in the future, and we'll get into a little more nerdier and spookier things, because that's something that we definitely we teeter on. But we want to thank you for joining. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
JD.
much.
Hey, thanks for having me. You got to visit the island and then report back on whatever paranormal
Yes,
stuff you find out there.
definitely.
That'd be nice.
Definitely. Yes.
All right. Take care, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.